Cuba's history is a long and intricate tale that stretches back thousands of years, shaped by indigenous civilizations, colonization, revolutions, and the ongoing struggle for sovereignty and identity. This narrative will take us through the island's ancient origins, the impact of European colonization, the struggle for independence, and its modern political evolution, leading us to its current place in the world. Cuba's story begins with the indigenous peoples who lived on the island long before European explorers arrived. The Taíno and Siboney peoples were the primary inhabitants, thriving through fishing, hunting, and agriculture. They lived in organized communities, worshipped a pantheon of gods, and created a vibrant culture. Their society was largely peaceful, and their lives were intimately connected to the natural world of the Caribbean. This era came to an abrupt and tragic end with the arrival of Christopher Columbus in 1492. Claiming the island for Spain, Columbus called it Juana, though the name Cuba, derived from the Taíno language, ultimately prevailed. Spanish colonization brought devastating consequences for the indigenous population. Diseases like smallpox and measles, introduced by Europeans, decimated the Taíno and Siboney peoples, whose immune systems had no defenses against such illnesses. Those who survived were often enslaved and forced to work under brutal conditions in mines and on sugar plantations. Within a few decades, the indigenous population was almost entirely wiped out, and the Spanish began importing enslaved Africans to replace them as a labor force. The 16th and 17th centuries saw Cuba become a key part of Spain's growing empire in the Americas. The island's fertile soil and strategic location in the Caribbean made it an important center for agriculture and trade. Sugar, tobacco, and coffee plantations expanded rapidly, and Havana became a major port for Spanish ships traveling between Europe and the Americas. However, this prosperity was built on the backs of enslaved Africans who endured unimaginable hardships and contributed significantly to Cuba's cultural and demographic makeup. During the 18th century, Cuba's importance to Spain grew even further. The 7 Years' War, 1756–1763, briefly brought the island under British control, but it was returned to Spain in exchange for Florida. The British occupation, though short-lived, introduced new economic ideas and stimulated trade. By the early 19th century, Cuba was one of the world's leading producers of sugar, thanks to its plantations and enslaved workforce. The 19th century was a time of significant change and growing unrest. Inspired by revolutions in the United States, Haiti, and Latin America, many Cubans began to demand independence from Spain. The first major uprising, the 10 Years' War, 1868–1878, was led by Carlos Manuel de Céspedes, who issued the Grito de Yara, a declaration of independence. Although the war ended without achieving independence, it planted the seeds of nationalism and set the stage for future struggles. In 1895, the Cuban War of Independence broke out, led by figures like José Martí, Antonio Maceo, and Máximo Gómez. This conflict merged with the Spanish-American War in 1898, when the United States intervened following the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor. The war ended with Spain's defeat, and Cuba was declared independent in 1902. However, this independence came with significant strings attached. The U.S. imposed the Platt Amendment, which gave it the right to intervene in Cuban affairs and maintain a naval base at Guantanamo Bay. This marked the beginning of a complicated and often fraught relationship between the two nations. The early 20th century was a period of political instability and economic dependence on the United States. Cuban governments were often corrupt and heavily influenced by American interests, particularly in the sugar industry. Social inequality and discontent grew, leading to periodic uprisings and coups. In 1933, a revolution led by Fulgencio Batista overthrew the government, and Batista became a dominant figure in Cuban politics for the next 2 decades. alternating between direct and indirect rule. By the 1950s, dissatisfaction with Batista's regime had reached a boiling point. Corruption, repression, and growing inequality fueled opposition movements. Among these was a revolutionary group led by Fidel Castro, Che Guevara, and Camilo Cienfuegos. In 1959, after years of guerrilla warfare in the Sierra Maestra Mountains, Castro's forces overthrew Batista, marking the beginning of a new era for Cuba. The Cuban Revolution brought sweeping changes to the island. Castro's government implemented land reforms, nationalized industries, and established universal health care and education systems. These policies significantly improved literacy and healthcare outcomes, but also led to tensions with the United States, which opposed the nationalization of American-owned businesses. In 1961, the U.S. broke off diplomatic relations with Cuba, and the failed Bay of Pigs invasion further escalated hostilities. Castro declared Cuba a socialist state and aligned with the Soviet Union, making the island a key player in the Cold War. The 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. The discovery of Soviet nuclear missiles in Cuba prompted a tense standoff between the United States and the Soviet Union. After 13 days of negotiations, the crisis was resolved when the USSR agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a U.S. pledge not to invade Cuba and the secret removal of American missiles from Turkey. This event cemented Cuba's role as a symbol of resistance to American influence, but also deepened its isolation. The following decades were marked by economic struggles and political repression. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 dealt a severe blow to Cuba's economy, as the island lost its primary source of aid and trade. The post-Soviet period of the 1990s was a time of severe shortages and hardship, prompting the government to allow limited economic reforms, including the legalization of the US dollar and the growth of tourism. In the 21st century, Cuba has undergone gradual changes. Fidel Castro stepped down in 2008, transferring power to his brother Raúl. Under Raúl's leadership, the government introduced modest economic reforms, such as allowing small private businesses and expanding internet access. In 2014, Cuba and the United States announced a historic thaw in relations, leading to the reopening of embassies and increased cooperation. However, the election of Donald Trump in 2016 brought a return to stricter policies, and relations have remained tense. Today, Cuba faces significant challenges, including economic difficulties, political unrest, and the ongoing U.S. embargo. However, it also remains a nation of vibrant culture, resilience, and a strong sense of identity. From its indigenous roots to its revolutionary legacy, Cuba's history is a testament to the enduring spirit of its people.